Hi everyone, my name is Olivia and I'm one of the empowerment advocates with Christine Ann Domestic Abuse Services. I'm excited to participate in this educational series we're doing about the tactics of abuse. I think it's important that we break down the traditional understanding of domestic abuse to include and expand upon the physical and the sexual violence that some folks experience. As we've already shared, we as an agency believe that domestic abuse is a greater pattern of behaviors demonstrated by someone to gain or maintain ultimately a sense of power and control over another person. As we explore those intentional behaviors, I'd like to start by sharing about isolation. I really feel it necessary to understand isolation as a key part of abuse because in my experience, isolation is the groundwork that must be laid in order for abuse to thrive. It's often the first behavior demonstrated in a quest for power and control. And it's ultimately isolating behavior is a shared trait among unhealthy people. Oftentimes, isolation takes direct forms with statements like, you cannot, and then fill in the blank, or geographically isolating someone. To best visualize this, let's think about ourselves as a circle at the center and all of our social connections as circles outside of ours, connected to us simply by strings. An unhealthy person has ways of cutting away one by one those strings until all that's left is what the other person wants to be there. All too often in a relationship, this is just two people left together with no social connectedness. These direct forms of isolation are more easily heard by our ears, seen by our eyes, and felt by our hearts. However, sometimes isolation can be way less direct, though still intentional. So I'd like to take it one step further and help us understand that at its core, isolation is really just taking a person away from any person, place, or thing that makes them feel safe, supported, or strong. It's important to understand that isolation can happen initially at the beginning of a relationship and something that happens over time. Our agency is proud to say that we serve all people in all types of relationships, but the examples I want to share today will be through the lens of intimate partner violence. An example of isolation would be where one person doesn't necessarily say you cannot, but there's this pattern of behavior that every time someone goes somewhere or sees someone, they're constantly asked questions about where they were going and why they were there. Another example I hear a lot about is one partner would never say that they can't do something, or hang out with someone, but they're constantly putting that person down. So that over time, what happens is someone just self-isolates as a way of surviving their relationship and the unhealthy questioning behaviors. Instead of being able to come and go as they please or speak with whomever, they cut their own ties to support and make their own lives easier. This is coercive control. The same result is ultimately achieved as if one person would have directly said they can't do something. I also think it's important to talk about natural factors. What we know going on in our world today is people are isolated simply by the nature of the pandemic. And what we know about domestic abuse, what we know about isolation is that isolation increases the frequency and danger for abuse. And so what we've seen is that relationships that were already unhealthy have potentially taken a turn to be more dangerous. Finally, at Christine Ann, I want you to know that we see support as the corresponding opposite of isolation, which is exactly why our advocates are here. We provide consistent and non-judgmental support to survivors in the hopes of creating a contrast to the unhealthy isolation behaviors survivors have already experienced. We value meaningful connections as a way to safety, support, and strength.